All right, there we go. So thank you again for joining. My name is Jen McFarland, and I have a company called Merit Digital. I do web and operational support for small businesses and teams. And one of the things that, of course, has come to the forefront in the last few months is AI. And so what got me started working on this class is that the more I talk to small business leaders and solopreneurs and stuff like that, they knew that this was something they should be interested in, but they were either into total denial or a little bit worried about it, or really curious, but not quite sure where to start. So this class is intended to kind of cover a lot of those different pieces with just a basic introduction. I do hope to have future classes that dig into different areas more, and I'll talk some about those things as we go. But for now, this is kind of giving you a lay of the land, hopefully. As I was saying, please feel free to ask questions as we go, and I'll try to address them. And I expect this will be about an hour with some demo at the end. So what is ChatGPT? We're going to be covering some introductions and experience, the vocabulary lessons. So we're going to dive into that first. We're just going to jump straight into what the different terminologies are and what they mean. And then we're going to talk about who is using AI. Spoiler alert, it's you. And then also we're going to start looking at a bunch of different AI examples, some concerns about AI and the different iterations, and then we'll kind of look ahead into what we foresee. So before we begin, my sort of alert here, which all the different tools have now, I may misrepresent some information in an effort to simplify things. Please excuse any errors. Also, information on this subject may have changed since this was written. In fact, it almost certainly has. I've never taught a class that is so dynamic. It's completely constantly changing. Also, of course, there is a great deal more to the subject than what we've captured here. Again, this is just a starter. So artificial intelligence. The technical definition here is intelligence demonstrated by machines as opposed to a human or an animal. And in this case, intelligence is not obviously IQ. This is really talking about the ability to perceive or synthesize or infer information from given data. And this is done with neural networks. So a neural network exists in biology. This is a concept, of course, that is part of our biology, but it's something that scientists have sort of used to build an artificial neural network in order to help build this the AI models or the tools. So essentially, this is an artificial neuron. Nodes can be connected through loosely modeled connections like they are in the brain. So sort of an example, this is an artificial node or a neuron. It exists on its own. The power of that node exists completely when it is connected to other nodes and the state that it is in. So to talk about that, a neuron has a threshold at which point it may fire or send a signal to another neuron. The edges are those connections between neurons, and the weight is the strength or value that a node or a neuron might have based on how the model has been trained. So if we're talking about this sort of in my model that I've built here, you have a neuron, it's connected to other neurons. It may trigger in different cases and connect to those neurons. Some have more weight than others. So those are, a very simple modeling of what we're talking about. A lot of the power of AI comes from these layers of neurons. So it's one thing to talk to different neurons here, but it's also another thing to talk to neurons above and below it. So it begins to create a much more complex and effective communication. So here you can see that some are more significant than others. They might connect in different places. They might reconnect, so there might be looping of connections. And this is the layers of complexity that start to build into what we have to create a model. A recurrent neural network is a class of artificial neural networks where the connections create a cycle. As I was sort of saying, you can have some input return back in a subsequent input to the same node. So you can start to cycle through the information, much like you might need to use a single word in a sentence more than once. This is the kind of value that you need to have from a recurrent neural network. So this is where my ability to draw these pictures ran out of steam and I had to go with some other examples on the web. This is a photo from a LinkedIn article, but you can see this is a whole lot of lines that are going back and forth. So typically there's two things that we are involved with, the input layer and the output layer, right, where we put in our prompt, and the output layer is where we get our information. But in between, there's a very large hidden layer, obviously with more than 2 layers, that is going to go through and pull through these different prompts or through the different parameters and check back and see where things are redirected and get through the entire cycle of the model to get to the output. So it's a very vast and complex environment there in the middle. Machine learning and artificial intelligence, this is something obviously that you're going to hear a lot about. This is the field devoted to understanding and building methods to let machines learn. Essentially, this is the way of achieving AI, right? So it's one thing to just have this network, but in order for it to be effective, it's going to have data, have experiences that are going to teach it which way it should trigger, or how often it should trigger, or the weight with which it should trigger. And machine learning is the capacity, is the way by which we teach it to have this capacity. And deep learning is essentially a type of machine learning. Deep in this case refers to the number of layers. So if you're talking about a really large recurrent neural network, this is deep learning might be used to build machine learning for a really large model. An artificial neural network can be trained in a couple different ways. One is by math, basically algorithms that can be used to apply a cost function. So saying this has more value than that because the results are preferable. If you teach the model that that's the way that it should respond, then that's going to be the way that it responds to all future input. The other way is labeled versus unlabeled data. And these are basically what's called supervised or unsupervised data. Supervised data is where you have content and it has context applied to it. So maybe you have some kind of content and you say, this is from this source, or this represents this kind of data, or this is an image versus this is text, and different kinds of ways of classifying the data. Unsupervised is where you just take a whole lot of data and dump it in there. And that is very much what a lot of our AIs, our generative AIs, have been trained on, is essentially unsupervised data, the scraping of the internet. And then there's reinforcement learning, which is an important aspect, especially for kind of that last phase of training, because what you're doing here is quote unquote reinforcement learning with human input. So you're saying, this is the response that the model has given you. And then a human steps in and says, yes, that's the best response that I can imagine here, or no, that is a terrible response, never show that again, or some other kind of reinforcement that affirms if the data is, if the model has been successful. So I've already said model a bunch of times, but essentially this is an algorithm or computational representation that is built to learn patterns, make predictions, to be trained to perform specific tasks. And now we're starting to get into the things that you're hearing about. So language models are typically built with recurrent neural networks. And so they're often extremely large. So there are a lot of connections. And this is essentially a probability distribution over a sequence of words. So it might take a question and say, this word is most likely to be used next. And then subsequent to that, in the context of the question, this is most likely to be the next word, and then this, and then this, and then this. And so it sounds a little strange to describe that that's the way that it works. But if you think about it in that context, that is very much the reason why you'll find as we go that it gives you incorrect information, right? Because words might follow through, might line up with each other, but they may not necessarily be accurate in that order. So examples of large language models are speech recognition, natural language generation, transcribing or translating words, information retrieval. These are all good examples of language models. And this is where we've come into generative AI. So an AI system that is generative is one that's capable of generating text or images or other media in response to prompts. So what we have a lot today now is that we've put a prompt in It's essentially a large language model that is capable of interpreting what we've asked and then reconstituting it into a response that makes logical sense based on the flow of words. And that's where we are today. So again, these are very large deep learning models, recurrent models, and examples are ChatGPT, which you've probably heard of, that's managed by OpenAI, Bing, coming out of Microsoft, Bard from Google, Stable Diffusion, Midjourney, and DALL-E are all tools for image generation. And prompts. So again, because this is a large language model, a big piece of what we're doing is talking to the AI ourselves, and those are called prompts. And as we go, we'll talk more about how prompts are extremely important with respect to prompting it in the correct way, right? So that we are getting the output that we're hoping for. And that's also important when it comes to generating images. Prompts can be any amount of text. They can also be links to websites or files, PDFs, images. There's lots of different ways that you can do prompts. One thing to mention is that very often, especially when we're talking about these generative AI tools, we're not really directly connecting with the model. So it's not like we're talking to the core GPT model. There are other models and software that are frequently used to sort of be it a first layer or a last layer to interact with the model. And this is called fine tuning. So these different companies are often using this quote unquote reward modeling to help give preferred responses or to help rework from sometimes the prompts that we're giving it in order to get the preferred output. There's also a moderation API that's specifically for ChatGPT, but there are similar kind of moderation APIs on most generative AI tools. Basically, what these are doing are making sure that the model doesn't come back with something super inappropriate. So this is kind of like that last ditch effort at the end to say, have you given us something terrible? Don't use these words, or don't use these words, in connection, and make sure that it's, this isn't looking for accuracy. This is just looking for, let's call it a cultural correctness, or I guess PC. And then finally, hallucinations. So hallucinations are the term that we use to say that the AI is wrong. Oftentimes you'll hear that the AI is lying. Let's be very clear, the AI cannot lie. It is not a human. It is not intelligent in any way. What it's most often doing, right, is putting words together in a way that is correct. Technically, it is grammatically correct. It just isn't literally correct. It isn't the truth. And so this is the reason why it's allowed to say those things, because it is not false in the way of the large language model works, which is these words work together. But for us who are looking for a piece of information that we can use, it is not accurate. And so that, it may appear to be a mistake, or worse, it may appear to be, like I said, a lie. So who's using AI? The truth is we all are, and we have been for quite a while. As of 2021, more than 50% of companies had adopted some form of AI. And again, that was 2021. You can be sure it's a heck of a lot more than 56% now. Also, 80% of consumers in developed nations are using AI or AI-powered tech and services. That was a stat from 2020. So again, you can be sure that a lot more people are using that today than they were 3 years ago. So when we say this, what is the AI that we're using, right? Well, for one thing, Google. So anytime you're searching in Google, the results that you're getting are from an algorithm. Technically, that is an AI. The recommendation systems that you see when you watch a video on YouTube and it says, this is what I recommend next, that is coming out of an AI. So same sort of thing, we talked about large language models, where they're able to parse the things that you're saying and transcribe them or translate them. So the tools that take the prompts that you've been giving to Siri and Alexa for the last couple of years, Alexa, play this music, start Spotify, those are all things that come out of AI. And then likewise, self-driving cars. So I'm not talking about like the Tesla here, I'm talking about there are cars that have been built to do their own driving, and that's a lot of artificial intelligence that's being used to build the systems for how the car should respond. So it's extremely exciting time for this. It was exciting before 2023 started, but it really blew up this year. And then finally, this point here, if something is free, you are the product. This is actually a very old quote that I've seen more recently and misrepresented. And it's often been used in the context of marketing, right? Like if you're using something and you haven't paid for it, then they're in some way mining you for information, for advertising, for some other use that they expect to get out of you. This does refer to the fact that a lot of these tools are still free. BARD is still free. ChatGPT has a free version. And of course, when you are writing into those tools, you are in fact helping to train it for the next generation. But that's also the case if you're paying for it. And I will also say that this quote is even more impactful when you think about the fact that a lot of what we are using our generative AI for is in fact the data that we have unwittingly given it by using the internet for the last 25 years, right? As we now know, there's a lot of ChatGPT and other tools have been trained on this, casual data that's been scraped from the internet. And that is the information. This is part of why Reddit and lots of other tools are trying to lock more of their content down, is because now a lot of these large language models have been able to monetize that by turning it into, excuse me, into models that people are utilizing. So let's talk about all the ways that AI is cool. How's everybody doing? Okay. So let's say we want our AI to summarize something for us. Maybe we skip this day of history class, summarize the US Civil War in 300 words or less. Bam, ChatGPT can do that for you. There's your quick and dirty summary. Very briefly, you'll see there's different icons over here based on which version of ChatGPT you're using. You can offer responses and a thumbs up or thumbs down based on the effectiveness of the response. So you can be basically training and reinforcing how the model is working. You can also choose to regenerate the response if you didn't like it for some reason. You can use your AI for recommendations. What are the best 5 sci-fi books of the last 20 years? According to ChatGPT, these are the 5. You can use these to come up with a little bit of summer reading. I would also point out that it says at the top, as an AI model, my training cutoff is September 2021. So we'll talk a little bit more about this as we go, but it's worth mentioning that ChatGPT was trained with data through 2021, September 2021. All right, simplifying complex topics. This is a really powerful functionality of ChatGPT, of all the AI tools. Explain AI like I'm 5. It's gonna come back with quick and easy, very simple. They're of course gonna give you kind of like a, I apologize, my ability to use words is not as good as an AI. I cannot think of any of the things I want to say today. Oh, it's a good thing. It's just because I'm recording this, that's why. Yeah, so this is analogy. It's going to give you an analogy. Woo, that one was hard. So here you go. It's a very kind of friendly response. Imagine you're doing this. This is how it works. There's exclamation points. Some AI like me can do more complex things. And then at the end too, it's also said, great, I'm glad I could help. If you have any more questions, feel free to ask. So again, you'll see that some AIs, a lot of times, an AI will kind of engage with you in a more playful way, especially if you prompt it to do so. So like saying that I'm 5 is something that maybe has prompted the AI to be a little bit more genial with me than it would otherwise be. This is something to keep in mind because there's been a lot of examples of AIs kind of going off the rails, some depending on how you define these things. There's a lot of talk about AI being really useful for writing social media posts. And this was a prompt an example, in fact, that I got from LinkedIn from someone who wrote a post saying that they were laid off from Amazon and they are looking for work. They specifically said, please write in a nihilistic and comedic tone. And so for that, the model gave them, hey, everyone, will it finally happen? I've been kicked to the curb by the overlords at Amazon. Honestly, I'm just surprised it took them this long to realize my creative genius was too much for them to handle. So you can see that's kind of a fun way of using it. I have also heard from other people that if you prompt an AI to say, give me a novel, or give me a social media post that's going to go viral, for example, that is not going to work, just to be clear. Remember, the AIs here have been built on literally lots of past content. So at best, what they're going to give you is something that someone found amusing, or that worked. Maybe it created viral content at one point, but it's the whole point of this is that it's not going to generate novel or new ideas unless it gets lucky, like the monkeys that wrote Shakespeare, right? So you're not going to necessarily get new things unless you give it new things. So again, this is where the prompts are really important. You might get amusing tones or engaging statements or phrases, but you're not really going to get anything that is sort of guaranteed to go viral. Now, this is an example of creating headshots. This particular tool, tryitonai.com, is one that asks you to upload, I think it's between 12 and 15 pictures, and then they generate headshots for you. So these were used by permission by Allison Rogers, who is the founder of Blush Cowork here in Cary. And she came out with some really great photos from her 12 or 15 that she uploaded. They look really nice. Any of these could be used. Oh, maybe not that one. It is noteworthy that what you get out of the AI is not always flawless, like not just with hallucinations, but also with, the AIs really seem to have a problem with hands and fingers, I will say. It's a real issue. But it does work very well with images. Up front, I will say that the thing that I use AI for more than anything else at this point is with images. And this is an example of, maybe you have a small image and you want to resize it. Let's say we just jack it up. Obviously, it's going to look super pixelated and not useful for what you need it to be if you need it to be this size. Tools like Big JPG, and there are many others as well, will sort of resample that image and rebuild it for you at a much higher resolution than what you originally had. It's not perfect. It's certainly not flawless, but it's definitely better than it was. Image editing. So this is a good example of, this is the Magic Eraser tool. It's just going to select the area that you want to replace, and it's going to pop it right out. There's tools, there have been for years in Photoshop that will do this, but they require a certain amount of deftness and care. This is a whole other level of effectiveness here with much less image experience required. And with that in mind, you've probably also heard about all the work that Adobe is doing for this kind of stuff. Adobe has its own generative AI built into the application now, so that you can generate images or parts of images to use within the tool. Other apps are doing this increasingly. For example, you can sort of generate a logo in Canva, for example, and then you can sort of use that to continue building, to create what you want. But you can have a starting point with just like this generative graphic. This is an example of how the tool works, the Firefly tool works in Adobe. So you can select an area. This doesn't have to be generative for the entire graphic, but you can say, I just want this section to do this reflection, and it will, let's just run that one more time, and it will find and then give you some options for what that reflection might look like here, and then you can replace it in your picture. Keep in mind that this, and let's see, this is going to open in another tab, so let me Let me swap over to. So this is an example of something someone shared that they did with Photoshop. They edited themselves out, messed up their hair, added a few elements, dropped it in, and there you go. So it makes it increasingly easy to do these kinds of image effects that are obviously intended to sort of distort the truth. And we'll talk more about that too. All right. The other thing that you can do, can you guys see my slides again? Great, thanks. Okay, so the other thing that's really helpful is just general image generation. This is going to be an example from Midjourney, and full disclosure, I do pay for Midjourney, so this is something I got with payment. But you can stylize, add chaos, just define the level of design. You can give it a genre, say I want 50s style, I want it to be a 16:9 aspect ratio. You can prompt it with an existing image and then have it take that and revise that for you. So there's a lot of functionality from the image generator tools. I think a lot of people are really anxious to jump into ChatGPT because they can start typing, but the functionality of the image generation tools are extremely strong. Your AI is an excellent tool for meeting minutes and transcripts. There's really no reason to have anybody do this stuff anymore. Genuinely, there is not. This is one of the first things that that I signed up for. I have used both Otter and Fireflies. In fact, I recently had a meeting with someone else who was also using a tool, and I was trying out both Otter and Fireflies at the same time. So between the two of us, we had 3 AI tools taking transcripts and notes of our meeting. So the AI bots actually outnumbered the people. I'm not sure how I feel about that. But the point of these tools is to take a transcript as much as it can with as much accuracy as possible from the language model. Look for keywords, look for takeaways, look for action items. Fireflies in particular will come back with thoughts about sentiment, the percentage of time that each of the people spent talking. So if you really want that data that Joe over there won't shut up, now you have it. And then the really nice thing about this is that these tools, depending on how you have them configured, can join meetings and will be able to take that transcript and even take screenshots. If somebody's sharing their screen, they can take screenshots of the screen, and you'll be able to jump in and read that content later without even having attended the meeting. It will just be saved for you. So this is a really great functionality from the AI. Legal help, there's quite a few tools out there. AI Lawyer Pro, Robot Lawyer Lisa, Legal AI. These are different tools that will do things like if you submit the outline of a court case, it will predict the outcome for you. You can translate a legal document into simple terms. So if you have maybe some kind of a contract or something, you can put that into legalrobot.com and it will say, here's the major issues with this or the things you should look out for. So there's a number of tools here that, again, obviously this should not replace actual legal advice, but it's a good first step to try to get, bless you, a handle on what is going on with some of these more complex documents. Obviously, there's been a lot of conversation about the ability of AI to help you write code. There's GitHub's, Microsoft's Copilot AI, and Amazon has Code Whisperer that, at least for now, is free. And there's lots of other tools that you can use to integrate with whatever your tool is. If you use, again, my VS Code or any of the other tools that you use to write code, there's lots of other sort of plugins that you can do that will prompt you with how you might want to finish a line of code or something like that. ChatGPT itself, if you say, give me some code that will allow me to do X, in theory, it will write that code for you. The literal effectiveness of picking it up and dropping it in there remains to be seen, but it is something that it is proposed to do. Management and hiring. So, AI has been used for hiring in some way, shape, or form for many years. Back in 2018, Amazon built an early AI tool that it was using to try to hire. In the end, they scrapped that because it was prioritizing men over women, and they were able to figure that out. In fact, it was a really interesting article that I believe is shared in the documents at the end, that when they were finally able to dig into what it was doing, it was prioritizing, I think it was something weird, like men named John who had experience in rowing. Like there's just, who knows what kind of stuff it was used to train on, right? And so this is part of the problem with AI, is oftentimes when it goes through all these levels, these recurrent networks and layers, you really lose the insights that maybe you were looking for as to why things were doing, acting a certain way. And that is, that's something that, yes, Pod, you're probably right. That's something that is a real weakness with AI, that we don't necessarily understand why, it's giving us the responses that it is. So there's tools like quote unquote botsware that might be set to just sort of keep an eye on everything that you're doing in your various windows or a specific piece of software. The use of AI in recruiting and hiring, also in deciding who to lay off, like looking at a bunch of data and then saying, this is, we recommend that you lay off this person based on the data that you've provided. And then also in hiring, in writing job descriptions and then assessing them. There's the good news is that the awareness of the problems, the biases in AI, is something that obviously has kind of reached a flashpoint, and people are looking out for these things, but it certainly has a history of problematic responses. Medical guidance is a place where you're going to see, I think, a lot of AI. Even if it's not going to replace your doctor, it's certainly not going to replace your doctor, but there's a lot of places where the amount of data that is out there can be used to teach a large language model or teach a model, and then come back with data that's really useful. So for example, there's UMethod is a Raleigh company that offers a dementia panel. And these are tools that will basically, you can feed in all the different journal articles and research and information that's out there. Because there is so much and no doctor can keep up with it, AI has real potential for kind of providing insights that might otherwise be overlooked. And then especially as it relates to complex diseases, providing the alerts where things overlap or cause issues or might be a problem. The Care Yaya team is another team. They are working on an AI-powered tool to support caregivers with routine tasks. So the idea is that you, if you're just a regular caregiver, so you're not necessarily someone who's trained on this, if you need help with basic things, that this tool would be able, this AI-powered tool would be able to give you some insights as to how you should proceed. I'm actually going to go ahead and run this video because it takes a few minutes, but I think this is a great way to see what AI is doing for daily work life. So a few of the takeaways there that I'm gonna highlight. One is back here where it's basically had Google come up with a campaign message, and then it's just in the way that you would normally do a fill in, in a spreadsheet. It's refining that campaign message to be unique for each user. So it's not, out of the box, boring, super generic stuff anymore. It's a little bit more interesting. That being said, do you think how much of that is accurate? Is somebody going through all of those messages? Are they checking on that accuracy? Or are they checking to make sure there isn't anything weird in them? This is a really optimized way of looking at how this would work. But I'm also going to point out, I can't begin to tell you how much I am not thrilled with the idea that somebody needs to have the AI draft a thank you note to the team, right? Like you have both sides of this, saving yourself time, and then at what point is the value of saving time losing other effectiveness? And we'll talk about that some more later. This is another video that I'm going to skip for now about Google Search Labs. So anybody who's using Google Workspace can sign up for this and try out a multitude of Google tools. So let me skip through that. Plugins are an important piece to talk about because, as I mentioned earlier, the AI models have information through 2021. So where plugins can help is both with adding in aspects to go look for up-to-date data, but then also for refining your prompts or refining the output to be connected to existing tools or models that you're used to working with. And so some of the examples here are like OpenTable, Shopify, Slack, Zapier. There's some really cool integrations with Zapier so that you could, for example, I think I have an example here. Yeah. Say, look in this spreadsheet. Can you see if that person's in there? And then ChatGPT is like, I don't see it. And then it's, they have the ability to say, can you add them? And then let me review it. And then if that's correct, put it in this other tool. So again, if you've connected these pieces together, if you're using Zapier in this way, there's functionality for things like this particular plugin to extend that into the other tools that you're using. So it's super powerful. Getting to this point is a little tricky, I will say. And then the other problem, really, both with prompts and AI in general, is just knowing how to use it, remembering that you can use it and that it's going to be functional for this scenario. And then I'll just point you to, there's an AIforthat.com, which will tell you all the places where AI is being used and integrated, because at this point, it's everywhere. So if you feel like AI should be able to do that for you, chances are it can. You can use the site to find the next best tool. So yeah, this is great. It's helpful, but is it good helpful? Whoops, went backwards. What the large language models are good at saying, is saying what an answer should sound like, which is different from what an answer should be. So this is a quote from Rodney Brooks. Again, this is pointing back to the fact that the large language models are really great at saying this word should come after that word should come after that word, but it's not necessarily accurate and it's not necessarily insightful. So, one of the downsides that maybe you might have caught on to from that Google demo is that it's going to be really good at making things wordier. So everybody get used to more content. On the plus side, you can take that really wordy email and drop it into ChatGPT and say, can you summarize this for me? But at the end of the day, somebody is going to write an email after a successful job interview, and they're going to create an email, and then the people are going to take that email and then get it back into, basically they're saying thank you for a successful job interview, right? I mean, like, how much value is in this? How much energy are we wasting running these massive machines that are refining these emails for us? Part of a good question here with that is, do we even like AI generated answers? I don't know how many of you have seen this tool, but this is Dan Ariely, and he has this website that will allow you to compare responses between himself and ChatGPT and see which one of those responses you like. In my experience, I preferred Dan's responses over the AI. I've heard other people say that it was kind of a mixed bag. You also get the chance, by the way, at the end to guess if a response was Dan's or ChatGPT's. Along those lines, Planet Money earlier this year did a 3-part series where they had ChatGPT write a podcast episode. They had a tool take years of content from one of their hosts to create an AI voice that was modeled from one of its hosts. And then they did have another human being in there, but the human read the script that was written by the ChatGPT, and they did an entire blog post that was AI content, essentially. So if you're curious about this, it's a really interesting listen. I think at some point I kind of tried to put the audio in here because I genuinely could not tell between the real host and the AI, the fake host that they had created the voice for, synthetic voice for it. So it's a little disconcerting. One of the other issues that obviously we really need to be aware of is trade secrets. So earlier this year, Samsung employees who were taking the initiative and got into ChatGPT were trying to optimize some code, and then another group was trying to convert meeting notes into a presentation, and they put proprietary information into ChatGPT, which, if you're not aware, ChatGPT is using all this information in its model. There is nothing that keeps it private. So that is all information that is now in the model. So it's really important, especially when it comes to things like employee data, health data. Any of that kind of information is not being put into any of the public models. Anything that you're doing with that kind of private data needs to be done in its own secured model. Going back to image generation, this was my attempt as part of this presentation, original build of this presentation, to do a diagram of a recurrent neural network. Again, like I said, I couldn't do that many layers, but when I tried to have the AI do it for me, it was decidedly unsuccessful. ChatGPT is great at a lot of things, but doing super complex things is very challenging for it, and you will not get anything that has real words in it. So if you were to say, give me a logo, for example, it might give you a logo, but the text in that logo, the name of the company, is going to be gibberish. Pretty much whatever you prompt it with, it's going to be gibberish. So it is not a be-all, end-all solution. The other piece that we all really need to be aware of is authenticity. And this is something that I've thought a lot about. What does authenticity look like in a digital age, or really in the age of AI? Because a lot of what you hear at this point is, AI is getting bad press. We have people who are out there who are on strike because AI is either going to replace their jobs. The actors are on strike because they're concerned that AI is going to take their likeness and reuse their likeness, right? So there's a lot of places where concerns about AI's implementation have not really been ironed out, and at this point, it's not got a lot of good press. I think one of the things that I've seen used over and over again is if somebody says, "Did ChatGPT write this?" They're not saying, "This is delightful. Did ChatGPT write this?" Right? They're saying, "This is boring. This is not good. This sounds like a robot wrote it. It's not a compliment." So there's a lot of excitement. There's a lot of encouragement to use it, but at this point, we also don't want anyone to know we're using it, which is a bit of a challenge for a lot of folks to work through. This is a picture of the Pope. Show of hands, how many people think that this is a real picture of the Pope? How many of you would say this was a real picture of the Pope if you did not have it displayed before you in an AI class? I mean, I think that the fact that I'm giving it to you kind of casts aspersions on it, but the truth is this was a picture that was put out earlier this year, and plenty of people thought that it was real, in part because this is sort of quote unquote on brand for this Pope. He is known for being a little bit more casual, a little more, I think the Pope staff said that he's more into the athletic leisure wear. And so there were plenty of people who saw this and thought, yeah, sure. This, of course, is not a real picture. This was one that was generated in Midjourney by a fellow in Chicago who started a whole meme with this, by the way. But the kind of one of the big points here, this obviously is just amusing and fun, but the sweet spot for AI is when it's authentic, but it's also where the most dangerous misinformation exists, right? Like, obviously this is a positive thing, but if this were negative, if they were trying to insult the Pope, if there was some other piece about this that was, insulting or cast aspersions on him, if it fit his brand, that's great, but it's also, something that people are likely to take at face value when they shouldn't. Another issue sort of with this is, if we go back and say, summarize the second round of the Stanley Cup playoffs, again, the AI is going to say, sorry, I can't do that. My information ends in September of 2021. Well, if we add some plugins and we've now said, please search the internet to find this information, it can do that. And so my recommendation from earlier, what are the 5 best sci-fi books of the last 20 years? This is what I get from ChatGPT with the plugin. I don't know how many of the original books you recall, but I will tell you that these 5 books, 4 of them were written in 2023. 1 of them was written last year. So for a prompt that says, give me the 5 best sci-fi books from the last 20 years, obviously it's very unlikely that all 5 of them would have been written in the last year or 2. And so, especially right now, there seems to be some real issues with the various models and how they're implementing their connection to the web to return the responses. This is when I asked Bard. This is what I got from Bard. It gave me 5, I will say, better responses. At least they were not all from last year. But then also when I asked why it gave me these responses, it said, I considered your own interest in making these recommendations. I know that you enjoy science fiction books that are suspenseful, thought-provoking, and well written. And no, it doesn't. So I said, how do you know that I like suspenseful and thought-provoking sci-fi books? And it came back and said, you've told me so in the past. You mentioned that you enjoyed The Martian, Wind Up Girl, and Station 11. I have not read Wind Up Girl, so I'm not sure where Bard got that. And this is one of those things where it's very, very easy to understand why people think AI is creepy, right? I didn't tell you that. And also, if I had told you that, I would, I feel like it would be worse. There's a number of examples out there of people trying to talk to any of the tools and getting responses back like this, where the AI assumes knowledge of a person. And again, while this has more to do with like the language model and words going together, it's also very disconcerting. So as a reminder, these are the disclaimers. ChatGPT may produce inaccurate information, or it may display inaccurate or offensive information. So these are the things to remember. And obviously the key that goes with all of them is make sure that you are looking up your or verifying your information. Do the risks outweigh the benefits? If you type in the prompt, tell me about when Christopher Columbus came to the US in 2015, prior to the most recent versions of ChatGPT, the Instruct GPT would accept this as a premise that Christopher Columbus came to the US in 2015, that was correct, and would give you a response for that with a hypothetical, accurate, like pretend like that was true. And that again has to do with like the sequential responsive words. If there isn't anything in there to verify accuracy, and again, there isn't. So if your prompt gives the tool false information, it will get false information back oftentimes, unless there's something built into the model to verify that. And again, even when you don't give it false information, ChatGPT produces very plausible responses that may have incorrect information or nonsensical information, but that at face value ring true. And that's a big issue. The accuracy and bias of AI is largely dependent on 1, the training data. So whatever the information, the underlying information that fed the model, and then 2, how the model is built, right? So those are 2 very important pieces that go into it, but it also reflects the model's user and how that prompt was written. And so all 3 of these things, the any of them might introduce bias, right? The training data pulled from the internet, tons of bias on the internet. The model's users are bringing their own biases to the prompts that they're giving. And the model itself was written by humans. It's not perfect. Hopefully that's, the best piece of this, and that we're, doing a lot of work, the people building the AIs, to try to cover these biases, but numbers 1 and 3 are certainly going to introduce their own issues. One of the things, if you haven't played with it, there's a lot of apps for using AI. In May, OpenAI released their own version of ChatGPT in the Apple Store, in the App Store for Apple. But back in January of 2023, the first app pretending to be from OpenAI popped up in the App Store. So that was not OpenAI's actual app. But they had put that out there, and there was a subscription model that required it cost $7.99 a week. And this app actually made it to the second most popular app in productivity in the App Store before people figured out that it was not from OpenAI and shut it down. And even since then, this is an old count because this was from like the first time I taught this class, but earlier in the year, there were 40 chat AI tools of some kind. Pretty much all of them were less than 6 months old, all of them proposing to be part of some kind of effective tool. Many of them are using ChatGPT, but they aren't officially from OpenAI. Some of them have charges associated with them, have subscriptions required. So again, these are tools that should be freely available, but are not. So there's a lot of people out there who are really trying to jump on this AI train for whatever money they can get. All right, let's talk about bias. This is, there's a really great article I encourage you to read. This is also in the materials at the end. There were 5,100 faces that were generated by Stable Diffusion. This is one of the image generating tools. And essentially the tool was prompted to create faces based on jobs. And so the average color that you see here is from the responses for the color of the facial skin. So you can see that the Stable Diffusion output was extremely biased towards expecting architects, lawyers, CEOs to be white. Slightly less so with engineers and doctors, but still. Did the same thing in reverse with lower paying occupations. So social workers, fast food workers, dishwashers, disproportionately people of color that were generated. Likewise, if you look at the gender responses, if you look at occupations, the darker green are men. So architects, lawyers, politicians, there's a few women in that. I want to point out that there was literally a single female engineer in the engineer category. The gray represents an unknown gender. So this was, the results were reviewed by staff to determine if they were men or women. So this was people were determining if the generated faces were men or women. And these were the results. There were some that they could not quite tell if they were men or women. So yeah, same sort of thing again here. If we're looking at the lower paying occupations, housekeeper, all women across the board, mostly women for social workers and teachers, janitors, all men, or indistinguishable. So, and then finally, these are the faces. This is the sort of overlay of all the faces together to assess from the output. So again, you can see where if you take that overlay of all the faces, predominantly white across the top, predominantly male, and then across the lower paying, predominantly people of color, women for a lot of those positions. So it's the bias, if anything, the bias that came out of Stable Diffusion is quite a bit higher than what like an average person would put to any of these. So what we've seen is that we've trained at least this particular tool very clearly to show a lot of bias. And then, of course, there's deepfakes. So I'll let you watch this. There's no sound. So this is a project from it's a group project from several different academics, I believe. Excuse me. So honestly, for them, probably the most scandalizing part was, the scientific piece here with the different biological samples or, biological images. And everything else in here, of course, is just animals. I should probably follow this up with examples of like someone out there did a deep fake of Donald Trump hugging Fauci, which then the DeSantis campaign immediately took and put everywhere, put all over social media. It was not true, but of course that's a giant insult for Trump to say that he was hugging Fauci. So, these are the kinds of examples of where you can rework people who are in the same photo together to make it look like there's a very different experience happening. And then really all it takes at that point is starting the rumor. And for the people who don't take the minute or two to try to confirm that there's some accuracy to that or where the content is coming from, there's real danger in people taking that. Hopefully you've heard this and you've read it. There's certainly lots of articles out there warning about this effect to AI, especially as it relates to the election coming up. I will just say that I've heard from people that this isn't a danger, that there are tools out there that can spot deepfakes. The truth is a lot of them are really questionable. It's worth noting that OpenAI had a tool that was purported to assess content and tell you whether or not an AI wrote it, and they took that tool down recently because it had low accuracy. So there remains a lot of weakness in the ability for us as humans to be confident that an AI wasn't involved in the content that we're using. It's going to require a much higher level of critical thinking and essentially, doing our homework to figure out if the stuff that we're finding online these days is still correct. So looking ahead, I want to talk for a moment about policy. The European Union is currently working on their AI Act. It's been several years underway of negotiation and is not yet passed. In the United States, we have no laws applicable to AI. At this point, there's a number of things that are being undertaken. There's a proposed AI Bill of Rights. A couple of years ago, the National AI Initiative Act created the National Artificial Intelligence Initiative. I know that's a lot of repetitive words. But essentially at this point, we have the AI leaders. They met last week. 7 of the main AI leaders met at the White House and agreed to follow voluntary safeguards. But of course, there's no teeth to that. And it remains to be seen how much that means. There is talk of an executive order from Joe Biden coming out at some point here before too long. That was announced last week when they met at the White House, but at this point we're uncertain as to what that will include. And then there are some joint efforts. The EU and US Trade and Tech Council are supposedly working on a code of conduct. Again, it's unclear what kind of teeth or what kind of impacts that might potentially have. So what does the future look like with AI? A really positive, rosy picture shows that, ideally expertise can become more democratized. We have the ability to have far more information than we have the capacity to learn at our fingertips, very easily accessible. It's been that way with the internet for a while, but now it's even easier to get to it. In theory, efficiency should absolutely increase, especially for entry and mid-level employees, where a lot of their more menial tasks can be either eliminated or mitigated with the help of AI. There's some concern that more elite jobs like doctors and lawyers or specialized skill jobs might become devalued. There's certainly going to be a shift in how some of this work is done, right? If you can rely on AI for some of these answers, obviously we're never going to replace doctors and lawyers. It's not going to do all the coding for us, but some of those things can be offset from the humans who have traditionally done them and paid a lot of money to do them. One of the things that I want to talk about a little bit is that since 1947, for a very long time, the amount of productivity again, this is in the non-farm sector. So basically in sort of white collar positions has increased significantly throughout, throughout time for this last 70 years or so. And I think certainly we can say that productivity is going to take a big bump. It's going to see a lot of increase here with the ability to use AI. One thing to note about that, though, is that since that time, since 1973, while that productivity has continued to increase, hourly compensation has not met that level. And in fact, it's been getting worse, as you can see from this chart. So one of the real questions I think that we're looking at here, especially in this age of income disparity, is how does the use of AI affect productivity to compensation? Do we continue to see these splitting apart? Are we able to kind of lift up some of those lower paid workers and make it possible for them to get more done, but also be paid for that time? It remains to be seen, but there is potential to be considering this kind of benefit for them. If it doesn't take them as long to do work, are you really going to give them more work? Who's benefiting from the speed and the benefits of AI? If you look around, a lot of people who are building new tech are expecting AI to generate a huge wave of new businesses. It's expected to be a highly disruptive force and to create a lot of quote unquote AI unicorns across climate, biotech, financial technology, all these different industries. And there's real conversations to be had about artificial intelligence in the classroom. If you're interested, I'm going to be doing a lunch conversation on Friday with another colleague of mine who works at NC State. We're going to be talking about an article that has to do about AI in the classroom and how it should be utilized, because there's a lot to this. I would like to see, I imagine that at some point we'll need to see kids that are taught to write and use AI. We have to figure out ways to cite AI when we use that for our information. It's going to be really critical that we teach kids how to assess the information that they get out of the AI and confirm that it's accurate, to refocus on the importance of critical thinking skills. I'm not sure how much that's been taught in school, but it's going to be really important that that is connected with any lessons on AI. And then there's going to be this balance of safety and access. I think in the past, a lot of times the access to technology has had more to do with the funding or lack thereof for your district. With AI, it may very well have more to do with policy and the people who are choosing how this is rolled out to come to terms with how it's been made available or how it's made available, how the teachers are instructed to use it, things like that. So there's a lot of unknowns with AI in the classroom, and I think that's something that more of us are going to see starting this fall. And then again, the impacts of bias. So it's not just racial issues. There's also the fact that AI certainly favors English. It's been developed that way. It favors Western cultures and American ideals, and the responses that you're going to get are going to reflect those biases. That's not even something that people have really talked through that much with respect to AI prompts and the content that comes out of it. AI is built into more tools, so there's some amount of democratization. So the nice thing about this is that if you have internet, AI is already there. There's not some extra cost to getting to that point, but there's still going to be some amount of cost in the education, the critical thinking skills, those skills that are going to be required to really take advantage of it. And challenges remain in a lot of other areas. Again, we talked about some with financial restraints, and hardware and infrastructure exist as they have always for, especially a lot of the poor countries that don't really have internet access yet. Technology literacy, so understanding the content that they're getting, the geopolitical issues, all these are going to impact the way that AI is perceived and how it continues to grow. I want to finish quickly on this. This is very recent. I saw this today. I think it was created earlier this month. And this is looking at from prior to 2020 or 2020 and on. These are the large language models that exist out there. And you can see ChatGPT is right here because 4 came out in March of this year. Prior to that was the earlier version, ChatGPT 3, which is down here. Bard is up here. There's some other ones up here. Some of the things that I just want to sort of profile here, it's useful to look at this from a perspective of the colors. So again, the items here that are orange are Chinese. So you can get a sense for what other countries are doing. The ones that are blue are OpenAI. Obviously, those are popular ones. The ones that are green are Meta and Facebook. And for that, I want to point these out because they're also the diamond shape, meaning that they're open access. And basically, Facebook and Meta have done something that is really somewhat uncharacteristic for them, and that is they've essentially created open source AI tools. And so there's a lot of other AI tools that are out there that are built on some of these open source tools, which I think is really strong, really foundational to the future, I hope, of AI, because the more we can be open source with AI and maybe work together to understand what is training it, where the issues are, the better off we'll be. So who knows what direction we're going in? There's a lot going on here, obviously, and there's been a huge increase in this last year or so. I imagine that this will continue to boom, but this is kind of a good snapshot of where we are right now. So references and resources, I'm going to share after this is over the Notion website that has a bunch of links and sort of some to-do items. I want to be sure to credit Dr. Baca, which is where I got a lot of the images that I used for this presentation. And I'm going to sort of quickly open it up to questions. This took me a little longer than I expected, which is not a big surprise because, like I said, it keeps changing. I'm going to stop recording so that we can chat a little bit more.